Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Schizoid Man, which is episode 6 of season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the episode The Schizoid Man. So The Schizoid Man is the episode where the away team encounters an old dying cyberneticist who claims to be the person who taught Dr. Soon everything he knew, so he refers to himself as Data's grandfather. And while the away team is busy and Data is spending time with them, he passes away and puts his consciousness into Data to try to cheat death and to take over Data's body. Of course, the crew is aware of this, and as they beam back to the ship, they have a funeral for the man and take their young, beautiful assistant back to a starbase where she's going to be transported to Earth. But Data starts acting very strange and bizarre and is showing a lot of jealousy towards Picard for spending time with Graves' assistants, and eventually they deduce that it is in fact Ira Graves who took over Data's body, and Picard tries to convince him to vacate Data's body, but Graves doesn't seem to value Data's life at all. However, what convinces Graves is that he inadvertently causes violence and hurts people in Data's body, breaking the assistant's hand and knocking out Geordi and Picard. And then so he vacates Data's body, puts himself into a computer where his consciousness pretty much gets lost in the shuffle, and only knowledge is left behind in the computer's data banks. And Data, of course, is returned to himself. So, for some reason, this is the episode that always comes to mind when I think of Season 2. And mainly when I think of how bad Season 2 is. And how some people try to, in retrospect, try to make out like Season 2 is actually not that bad, or it's like way better than Season 1, and it's like it's still like it's when the show got really good. I think of episodes like this, and I think to me this represents, like, it's not in a vacuum. Like, every season has their terrible episodes. Season 7 has Sub Rosa. But and Season 4 has The Loss, and Season 5 has the Masterpiece Society. But anyway, this is not just one bag of egg out of a good season. It's representative to me to just how lazy and boring and not good the writing was for Season 2. And I don't know. Yes, so this has kind of become a symbol in my mind for the overall tone and overall quality that we got from Season 2, rightly or wrongly. That's just, for some reason, I always associate Season 2 mainly with this episode, which I don't like. Let me start with the opening scene with the beard, because I always found this weird. I always get this episode mixed up with Data lore, because Data lore begins with him practicing sneezing, and then this one, he calls in Geordi and Troy to look at his new beard. I always get these scenes mixed up, and in fact, I almost thought he would be sneezing with the beard. They're very similar. In fact, this episode is similar to Data lore in other ways that I'll get into shortly. But, we meet a relative of Data. I swear to God, like, Data will end up being the one character from Next Generation where we meet the most of his relatives from. He's an android, yet we meet his brother, his grandfather, his father, his mother, his daughter, and then his other daughter, and and his stepbrother, and his cousin, maybe? I don't know. There's way too many relatives. But anyway, Yeah, his stepfather. I don't know. But yeah, let's not get into this. But anyway, that's ridiculous. But this is only the second relative we met so far. His grandfather, which is stupid. But anyway, the whole thing with the beard. Geordi is like, oh my god, said, what did you do to your face? Did you damage it? And then Troy starts laughing hysterically and leaves, and Data's just like confused. It's like, why is she laughing? And then Geordi's just like, oh god, don't leave me here. Here's the thing. Here's my opinion. Here's my take on this scene. Geordi and Troy are being dicks to Data. There is nothing wrong with that beard. It is a perfectly good beard, and I think particularly Geordi's line about, oh, did you damage your face? I every time I hear that line, I'm thinking, Geordi, you're an asshole. Like, what? It's clearly a beard. Now, maybe this is a disconnect between the script and the actual prop, like the actual costume designer or prop or whoever's responsible for coming up with the beard, because maybe it's supposed to look like ridiculous and stupid, but it looks fine. It's a perfectly acceptable beard, and so I always feel like Geordi and Troy are like assholes in this scene. I really do. Now, granted, when Data starts like being like, when I stroke my beard thusly, does it not make me look more intellectual? Like, okay, that is, I would laugh at that. Okay, so I can excuse Troy for laughing at that because that's a bit ridiculous, and of course Data wouldn't get it. But the whole way they're treating the situation, plus I think Troy like overreacts, and then Geordi is like, "Did you damage your face? How about I damage your face, Geordi, for being such an asshole?" And sorry, yeah, that's it's clearly a beard. Clearly a beard. Clearly he didn't damage his face. Clearly he wanted to have a beard. And what is wrong with Data wanting to have a beard? If he wants to have a beard, let him have a fucking beard. Now, this is completely, next scene we have, he doesn't have the beard anymore, so you assume that he took Geordi and Troy's reaction as a negative criticism and decided to get rid of it. Which is a good thing that Data doesn't experience emotions, because he could be really hurt by the reactions if they did, because they're being dicks. Anyway, I do wonder though if this scene is like a commentary on Riker growing, which he just grew a beard for season 2, which, this is only 6 episodes in, so I wonder if they're being like, ooh, let's, poke fun at people who decide to grow beards, like Riker did or whatever, or that Data would be like imitating Riker, which I think kind of makes a bit of sense. If it was like, oh, well, if Riker's, all of a sudden going to have this new look with the beard, maybe I should try it. I think that makes sense for his characters, and I wouldn't mind him having a scene like this if Geordi and Troy weren't such huge dicks to him about it. The other thing is that, and the reason why I get this mixed up with the sneezing scene from Data Lore, is that this scene has no relevance to the rest of the episode. It literally could have been put in any episode at the start, and the rest of what happens really has nothing to do with anything. I mean, I suppose you could make a loose connection to Geordi thinking, when Graves very obviously took over Data's body, that Geordi thinking, oh, maybe he's just, trying to be too human, kind of connect that to him growing a beard at the start of the episode. That's your loose connection, but still, it's like, not really. It really doesn't really have anything to do with anything. Anyway, so let me get into the bulk of this episode and why I don't like this episode very much. And the main reason why I don't like this episode is how obtuse and stupid the main characters are. Now, one thing I will grant this episode above Data Lore, because Data Lore also had a huge issue with the fact that someone who was presenting himself as Data clearly was not Data. In that case, it was his identical twin brother, Lore, pretending to be Data, and he was going, beautiful, isn't it? And nobody noticed except for Wesley, which is dumb. Unbelievable. But the one slight credit I will give this episode is, in this case, you have Ira Graves is taking over Data's body, so it's really Ira Graves posing as Data. And so the one thing I will give this episode credit for is people at least notice it immediately. They notice immediately that Data's acting weird, and as the behavior gets worse, they become more concerned, and they notice it the whole time. They're not completely moronic idiots who are completely oblivious to Data, clearly not acting like Data like they were in Data lore. So I will give them credit for that. At least they freaking notice this time. But I still think they're being obtuse and dumb, because Picard does not put together that this is Ira Graves controlling, that Ira Graves put himself into Data's body and is taking over his body. He doesn't figure this out till way too long, till 3/4 of the way through the episode, maybe even longer than that. So basically not till the final act, towards the very end, does Picard finally put together, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious. Now, I think the obvious counter-argument to this is that it's easy for me to say, as an audience member, someone who's watching an episode on screen, because I see everything. I see the conversation that Data has with Graves. I saw Graves talk about how he's going to put his consciousness in the computer. And then I saw all the different interactions Data's having. It made it clear that Graves had a crush on his assistant, and then I see Data hitting on the assistant, and characters within the show, in the universe of the show, don't have all the information that I have. Picard wasn't there when on the planet, and Troy wasn't even in the room to hear the conversation that Ira Graves and Data had, and stuff like that. So I could see that being the argument someone makes. For one thing, if the episode itself is trying to pull the wool over the audience's eyes, then it does an absolutely horrendous job of it. But I don't necessarily think it is, although it never states outright that Ira Graves put himself into Data's body, but it's fucking obvious. From the very first scene, as soon as Data comes out and says that Ira Graves died, and he says it in a way that is very un-Data-like. It's obvious that the Ira Graves put him, especially since they had the scene that described Ira Graves wanting to put himself in the computer. Super, super obvious. But as far as the characters like Picard and Troy or whatever, sure, maybe they wouldn't figure it out right away because they don't have the information, all the information that the audience, the viewer, has. But I think it took them way too long. It took them way too long to figure it out. And their theories that they were coming up with why Data was acting so way were stupid. Geordice is just saying, oh, maybe he's just trying to be too human too hard or whatever. And in fact, Troy even says that she's feeling emotions, specifically intense jealousy, coming from Data, which is a huge red flag. Now, why am I saying they should have specifically picked up those Ira Graves way earlier? And it's funny that Picard's the only one who can figure this out, and he only figures this out after talking to Solar and Troy about their time on the planet, when Troy and Solar describe the characteristics of Ira Graves, and Picard's like, does that sound familiar to you? And by this time Picard figured it out, but he's just trying to get the others to go along with him here. But he's like, doesn't that sound familiar? So why didn't Troy figure this out? She's supposed to be a psychological expert and pick up sort of personalities and is able to sort of analyze people, not to mention she's a freaking empath. And so First of all, and this is consistent with canon going forward as well, that she can sense emotions from Data, even though he's not an organic being. I'm fine. That's been established. I'm fine with that. We'll go with that. She can sense any emotions. It doesn't matter if they're organic or not. Okay. Although holograms are always blank to her, even though they sort of have emotions. But anyway, let's not get into that. For whatever reason, she can sense emotions coming from Data. So if she can sense his emotions, first of all, I think she should have brought this up a lot earlier than just the jealousy, as she should have been able to sense all those other emotions coming from him this whole time Graves had his body, and she should have immediately raised the red flag as like, there's emotions coming from Data, and that should have set everyone to, oh my god, how the hell are you experiencing emotions? What's going on? What's wrong? And they should have brought this up to Data. Are you experiencing emotions? And if he tried to lie, Troy would say, no, he's lying. He definitely is. And then they could just really sense that something's up. But anyway, kind of getting off topic. Main focus. Why Troy should have been able to figure this out is because she can sense the emotions of Graves, and then he senses the emotions from Data. She should be able to recognize immediately that they're the same goddamn emotions and the same patterns and the same type of behavior. Like, even leaving out the fact that she's an empath or that she can sense emotions from Data, the fact that she should be a behavioral specialist and should be able to immediately match the behavior patterns of Graves to Data. That's point number one. But anyway, it's not just Troy. They all should have been able to figure this out, because, and you don't even have to be a psychic. Like, I think she should have been the first to figure this out. It's stupid that Picard had to point it out to her, because Picard wasn't even on the planet, didn't even meet Ira Graves. So the people, especially Troy, who met Ira Graves and is a psychological expert, she should have definitely 1,000 times been able to figure this out. So they really did her dirty, made her come off as an idiot in this episode. But it's not just Troy. They all should have been able to figure this out when you get into the more obvious clues, such as Data all of a sudden being super jealous of Picard hanging out with whatever her name was, the assistant of Graves, and showing like affection towards her, like he has a crush on her. It's fucking obvious that he's acting like Ira Graves, because bear in mind, Troy had already established to everyone that Ira Graves, which is kind of mean of her to do that, but that Ira Graves had a thing for his assistant. So that's a known fact. And so when Data all of a sudden starts being, showing emotions or being very super jealous and super into her, it's fucking obvious. Now, you might say, well, that's not enough for them to make the huge leap that, Ira Graves put his consciousness, his self into Data, because that's clearly something that's not established in this world as being, capable of, or the norm. And so it's unusual, so maybe that's why they didn't figure it out. Oh, Kareen, that's her name, Kareen. Anyway, so maybe that's why they didn't figure out that why that it was Ira Graves. But you combine that with the very, again, known fact that Ira Graves is a brilliant scientist who specializes in what? Cybernetics. Of fucking course it's him. Of course it's him. I'm sorry. But it portrays the entire crew as the biggest bunch of morons that ever walked this earth. And the fact that we, the audience, instantly know from the get-go, as soon as Data comes out of that meeting and says Graves is dead, we know instantly that that's Graves taking over Data's body. And so that makes it way frustrating that it takes the characters in the show. So we spent like 40 minutes watching the characters in the show being completely oblivious to something that is freaking obvious to us. And moreover, it gets even more frustrating when it should be obvious to the characters themselves, and yet they're stupid, and Picard has to be the one who finally figures this out. Even though Troy should have, if she was any goddamn good at her job. So that is a huge, in my opinion, gigantic knock on this episode, and I cannot forgive it for that. Point to the fact that I was never interested in this storyline. I was never interested in Ira Graves. He comes off as a huge asshole, although, to be fair, he has a few good lines in this episode, such as when he's talking to Data, and he was saying, "Oh, I was a lady killer in my young age," and Data's like, "Oh, you participated in a homicide." It's not as a phrase that means I was, irresistible to the women, and he's like, "Oh, you were?" He's like, "Nah, I wasn't. But what the hell? I'm dying. I can remember my life however the hell I want to." That was a cool line. That was a cool scene, but most of it was just him being a dick and an arrogant prick, stuck-up prick, and being like, "Oh, I'm the greatest man, whatever, ho ho ho." And so so that puts me off. That makes me not like him, firstly. Secondly, they don't really have him there for that long, so I'm not that really interested in him. And then they hang the whole episode on him, controlling Data or whatever. And so I don't know. I just have very little interest in that, and it didn't seem well developed. It just seemed kind of sudden, and the resolution seemed to happen very easily too. Like that he decided that he was so firm that he deserved to live, and Data did not, because Data was just a machine. Yet he would finally just give up, just because he hurt a few people. I don't know. That's portraying Ira Graves as a man of very, very strong conscience who could not, stomach doing any violence to anyone. And I'm sorry, that's not really how that's not how they developed this character. That's not how they describe this character. I don't really buy it for that character. I buy that the character would be more like finding ways to justify what he's doing in order to, control his own will. Now, I do get that he would be upset when he hurt his love interest, but I don't buy that he'd be willing to kill himself over it. And the fact that once he did transfer his consciousness into the computer, the fact that the consciousness just evaporates and all it is knowledge, like, how does that work? Like, because he was planning on putting himself into a computer to begin with, because he didn't know he was going to meet Data. So, what was that a part of his original plan, for his consciousness just to evaporate? And why would it do that? That's not really how this has been established. Like, Picard was able to put himself in the computer in that stupid episode, Lonely Among Us. P for Picard. God, that episode is so dumb. So why would this be the outcome? I don't necessarily buy it. But anyway, so let me talk about Dr. Solar. I feel like a lot of the big, huge deal has been made out of Dr. Solar, and she only appears in this one episode. It's the only episode she ever appears in, and she doesn't really have that much to do. She's just a Vulcan doctor. I think people were just more interested in the concept of having a Vulcan doctor on Next Generation, because Next Generation had a severe lack in Vulcans, and in fact I think they did that on purpose. It was a Roddenberry thing of trying to differentiate the Next Gen from the original series, and they just didn't want to repeat Spock And Vulcans weren't really a thing. Like, they would pop up occasionally as cameos during Next Gen Deep Space Nine, but it wasn't until Voyager that introduced a Vulcan main character, and then Enterprise, which of course really got into Vulcan culture, not just with the character T'Pol, but the Vulcans being a main part of that show's ethos. Even though they turned them into assholes, but that's a different topic. So now looking back on the Trek, especially taking in modern Trek into account, which you get lots of Vulcan characters, even Spock again, but so now looking back on it, it just seems like, oh yeah, it's just another Vulcan. But at the time, and even like not just when this episode aired, but up until the mid '90s, until Voyager started, Vulcans weren't really a thing in this iteration of Star Trek. And so I think more people were enamored with the concept of having a Vulcan reoccurring character. And I do believe that she was originally intended to be a reoccurring character, and in fact, apparently they were supposed to have a romance between her and Worf, a Klingon and the Vulcan. That actually might have been interesting. How they, at least they both have superior strength. So yeah, that might have been an interesting concept, but apparently they abandoned it when they did the episode The Emissary with Kalar, who became Worf's love interest, who was also incidentally played by the same actress, Susie Planskin, I believe that her name is, who played Solar. She also played Kalar, and then she also played a Q over in an episode of Voyager. Susie Platskin. Yeah, Susie Platskin. And I liked her better as Kalar, to be honest. I think Solar, while an okay character, I didn't really go crazy about her. She would be mentioned by name throughout the series. Dr. Crusher would often name drop her. Oh, I'll have Dr. Solar help, but you never actually see her again. I wish they would have shown her again. And there was the novels, The New Frontier, which is a series of novels that had an original ship and original characters. Just based on the book, so it's not actually canon. And she was one of the main cast of characters in that series of books. I think they made her the main Doctor. And so it's obvious people were very interested in the concept of her, and I do think it would have been cool had they actually went forward with making her a recurring character, but I don't see the big deal about her, and I don't know. And I was watching this review where they were saying, oh, she took over for Pulaski in this episode. I'm like, no, she didn't. Pulaski is still in this episode, and Pulaski is still very clearly the chief medical officer. She's just having Solar help her in some regards. And Pulaski, I don't know. Pulaski was involved in this episode in other ways, but so she was okay. But I don't know if I really have anything else to say about this episode. I already touched about how ridiculous the storyline with Ira Graves was, and just how annoying Data's being controlled by Graves was. I just didn't really find it funny, when he was at the funeral and saying to know him is to love him and to love him. I didn't find that shit funny. I just didn't like the character of Graves, whether it be portrayed by the actor who portrayed Graves or by Brent Spiner portraying Graves in Data's body. I didn't like him. I didn't think this stuff was funny or clever, and especially when he started showing emotion, jealousy towards Picard, it just makes me so frustrated that they can't clearly see that's Ira Graves. Of course it is. and overall, I would say this episode's boring. I think it is mostly just uninteresting. It doesn't really have much to say character-wise. or much to say about commentary, or much to say about the plots. It's just frustrating because it's the characters not being able to figure out something that's completely obvious to the audience. So I just don't find this a particularly good episode. So let me go ahead and thank my Patreon supporters for supporting on Patrons. Very much appreciated. It does help me continue this channel, and very thankful for your support. So we have Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Metagester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very much for your support. So we do have a couple of Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Greg Marley, who says, "I'm sorry, but I like this episode." You better apologize, Greg. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding, of course. You can like whatever episode you want to like. All opinions are welcome here. Anyway, I'm sorry, but I like this episode. It touches the lighthearted silliness sometimes present in the first couple seasons before they started taking themselves so seriously, and I do always chuckle at Data calling Gray's grandpa and later acting so out of character. Picard telling Data, "No, you are finished," is good, and his confrontation with Data is interesting. He's irritated enough that he actually grabs Data by the shoulders. I wish they had cast the Vulcan Dr. Solar as a regular supporting character. I just realized she was played by Susie Plaxton, who was also Worf's mate Kalar, another supporting character I always wish we'd see more of. So I guess it's not a coincidence that I find both of them interesting. So next comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, "Ugh. Outside of actually seeing the only time the often referred to Dr. Solar, that for that one reason, I'd place this episode on the skip list. The grandpa old man was bothersome, made worse by Brent Spiner's hammy acting. Remember when I said only one android and only one Soon was good out of Spiner's many characters in the series? Well, this one was a bad one. I will boast it up 1 through Dr. Solar and give it 2 possessed androids out of 10. Yeah, I tend to agree. So my rating for the Schizoid Man, I always call that because it's shit. Get it? Shit episode. Anyway, my rating for the Schizoid Man out of 10 is going to also be a 2, extremely poor. Yeah, I just don't think this has entertainment value. I started to question myself why I give this a lower rating than Outrageous Akana. I mean, surely that episode is worse. But Outrageous Akana, as annoying as that episode was at least entertaining. This was just boring, and I didn't really see the point of it. And I didn't like Ira Graves. I didn't like seeing Ira Graves in control of Data's body. I wasn't interested in the dilemma of Ira Graves keeping Data. And it's just so frustrating to watch because the whole entire time the crew is trying to figure out. They can't figure out the obvious. And I hate it. I hate that. It is just so annoying. Anyway, that is it for my review of the Schizoid Man. So now let's check out what's coming up on my channel next. So this Wednesday will be my review for Unnatural Selection. Thursday will be over on Patreon for a revisited. For the episode A Matter of Honor. And then on Saturday, still on Patreon, for another revisited episode for my revisited for The Measure of a Man. That the very popular episode. So that will be fun to revisit. And then next Monday I will be back on my main channel with another new review for The Dolphin. So that will be, yeah. So that's what's coming up on my channel. So please be sure to check it out. Check out as I continue to cover all sorts of Star Trek videos and many other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.